Excellent, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being available to tune in for our third session in this series. As always, we're taking a look at features of SugarCRM that are not often covered, we feel well enough, or maybe are maybe like hidden gems that we want to expose for people so they can get better use out of their SugarCRM systems. The topics that we're taking a look at for today, which I'll just bring up our agenda, are going to be user interface simplification, layout configuration, and mobile layout configuration. So just to start with the first area we're looking at here, we find one of the biggest areas that can be difficult for some when they first switch over to using Sugar is user adoption. And that we find can be sometimes just because the interface can be quite complex. There's a lot of things that you can do with SugarCRM, so that there's invariably a lot of things that you can obviously display to the user, and that overwhelming of information can be quite daunting. So one of the things that we find does help a lot with new user adoption of the system is to make changes that both simplify what is displayed for the user, but also present only what is, I suppose, useful for the user as well too, so that they're not having to worry about dealing with aspects of the system that are unnecessary. Key to that is setup of the environment in ways that make it simpler. And there's a few things that we want to take a look at there this morning. So what I'll do is I'll bring up the screen for our Sugar environment, and we'll just start taking a look at a few of the areas in here. So probably key things that are worth taking a brief look at when you're in Sugar and setting up, especially for the first time, is in our administration panel. And just looking at a few key things. So really in here, the key things for us are going to be inside Locale and currencies. So we'll just take a quick look into Locale first. So in here is where we can set the default settings for all users when they set into the system, and it's really also the default settings for how we engage with the content in the system as well too. We've got things for the user interface especially. So this is how data is presented to us. So we can obviously choose the format in which the data is presented, and we can also look for one that suits the format that we're comfortable with using. Again too, with time settings as well too. Language, which should default to the appropriate one by default. And then also name format as well too, depending on how we prefer to have that set up. I find the default setting works well for that as well. Other key thing to happen in here as well too is that by default, obviously the system currency will normally be set up for US dollars. So we'd normally come through as well too, and just make sure that the default system currency is Australian dollars as well too, especially for everyone that is either an Australian user or deals primarily with the Australian currency. Ultimately, if you deal with a different currency primarily, that's where you might consider maybe setting that up as the default in here as well. Those few settings there go a long way to helping with the config, because they allow us to just cover a few of the default aspects that any user might have to configure on their own, and just cover it for them initially. So what we do is we normally just hit save on that and then return to our admin page. Should just come through for us in just a second. And the other area we'll look at there, as I mentioned, is we'll just take a look at the currencies section as well. Now, currencies in SugarCRM, you need to set up for each one that you do work with. You can have multiple currencies set up in the system. So it's always good to make sure that we have those set up appropriately there. So that's over on this side. Just in our currencies environment here. So you may have a couple set up in here already. I always encourage you to set up the ones that are key to your businesses and all the ones that you will use, so that you can, obviously incorporate those into the quotes and opportunities module down the track. It does also have the option here to indicate the conversion rate against the default currency. So depending on how you've set that up, you would then adjust the conversion rate for the other currencies against that primary currency so that it can also correctly display the currency in its selected currency and the default one as well. These are as simple as just hitting create and then just giving them the name and their code. So the ISO 4217 code is normally just the 3-digit key for that currency. So, for example, Australian currency is AUD, US currency USD, the Japanese yen JPY. It's as long as you know the default code there, you just put that in, and oftentimes the system will automatically then pick up the correct currency symbol as well for you. So very simple. And if you don't know the currency, you can just look it up online and find that one, and then that makes that easy to put that into the system. So definitely something just worth to know that that's in there. But probably the main thing that I want to take a look at now, that we just talked about a few of the, I suppose the default settings for the system, is we now look at the settings that we would set for the users when they come in. So the users can configure these settings themselves as well. So depending on how you're configuring the system, either you can do this beforehand on their profile before they log in, or they can log in and access their profile and do this after the fact. And they can do that either for an administrator by coming to the user management section in administration and then selecting the user that you want to edit. Or if the user is doing it themselves, just clicking the profile icon on the top and selecting profile, and then hitting edit on their own profile. From there, whether you're on their profile or they're on their own, once we're in the edit, we just take a look at the advanced tab. So a few things will be in here which will default. So if we've set up our system settings before creating the users, things like the locale settings, default currency, time settings and everything else will automatically default to those settings that we set. So that's why it's always good to set those locale settings first up. But then once we've come in, there's a few other things that we would normally just configure specifically in here. So key one is just making sure that we select the correct time zone for that particular user. And this is important so that when we create meetings and tasks and calls in their calendar, that they appear at the correct time for them, but also at the correct converted time for other users so that they know when that particular person's calendar is booked out, relevant to their time zone. For me, I'm just going to locate the correct one for us, which is Australia, Brisbane. You can see that these time settings haven't been set, and that's because this environment existed before we changed the locale settings. So that's just another reason why we'd suggest doing those first, because it saves you then having to come through and configuring it again for each individual user. From there as well too, even though we've got the default currencies, if we have a user that maybe works in a different currency, we can also then choose their preferred currency so that that's how the quotes and opportunities display content to them, even if they select a product that's defaulted to a different currency as well. Other than that, the other key one that we normally like to make sure gets set for each user, just to make things a little bit easier with regards to the calendar, is also that the default calendar start date is set. For us, we tend to like to select that as Monday, as that normally represents for most people the start of their work week. Aside from these few other options, the other key things that we want to do, especially if we are utilizing teams in SugarCRM, is to make sure that we are setting up any default teams for the user straight off the bat. So default teams here will control what teams are applied to records that the user creates. So anything that they create in the system, so contacts, leads, opportunities, account records. These settings here will dictate what teams go into those by default, and that's a good way for controlling visibility on records, especially for, like, say regioned areas, or even for access levels as well too. Aside from doing some basic configuration there on the user profile as well too, which does go a long way to helping with the setup of the system. What we find goes a long way to that, as we mentioned earlier, is interface simplification. So we're taking a look at that firsthand. Now, what you'll probably notice here with my account at the moment is that my nav bar is absolutely full of items, so much so that it actually hits the end and then extends into this additional drop down here. There are a lot of very useful functions in SugarCRM, and some of them have obviously a place for standard users, and some of them don't. Some of them might be features that you're not using at this stage in SugarCRM, or it might be features that certain users don't need to have access to. At any rate, having this many options to start with can confuse the system a little bit and make it more difficult to identify the key areas that they need to work with. So a big change that we like to make here is just to simplify that navigation bar to start with, so that we're not presenting unnecessary options to the users. So to do that, I just come into our admin panel again, and this time I come down to the developer tools section and go to the display, modules, and subpanels. Now, this is a universal setting for all users. So any changes I make here will affect every user in the system, including administrator users. And what I want to go through first of all is just identify the modules that we don't use. So for starters, I just come down here. As we covered in one of our previous training sessions, we were talking about the process definitions dashboard. Because my administrator has that set up now, we don't need to have that displayed in the navbar. So I'm just going to remove all of those elements out of here. That already removes a good chunk out of that navbar. Next is I'm going to remove modules from the navbar that we access from other places. So for example, we've got our documents module here. Now, the documents module, we only really need the users engaging with that when they're on a contact record and they're looking at the documents related to that record. So I don't need that displayed up here in the navbar because that will be visible on the contact record as a subpanel. So all the content that they need to access for documents will be available there. So I can remove that from that section here. Other than that as well too, I might find that it might be the same thing for calls, meetings, and tasks, because I can access those through the calendar in SugarCRM, and I can also access those from the sub-panel on contacts and accounts and opportunities, etc. as well. So I decide that I don't need those displayed immediately on the navbar either, so I can remove those also. Same thing with notes. We might find that we're not using the bugs module at all at the moment with here. Same with the tags module. Revenue line items are only associated with our opportunity. So again, we can remove those out of the initial navbar. And the same with quoted line items that are associated with our quotes. Forecasts, I might want some of the users to be able to access that one there. So I don't want to remove it completely, but we'll take a look at how we remove that one next shortly. So I would just go through and finish that. We're not using contracts. We're not using the data privacy, knowledge base, business centers, customer journeys or customer journey stages, especially because we'll be accessing those on the relevant records that they're triggered on. So I can save those changes there, and immediately I've taken that large, daunting navbar, and we'll see this update in just a second, down to something much more manageable. So here we can now see that we're presenting a few options here that are only going to be relevant to some of the users. So very easily there, we've only got the modules they need to access, accounts, contacts, opportunities, and leads, and a few additional ones here. Now, there are still a few modules here that maybe are not appropriate for some users because they don't have any need to use that functionality. So what I can then do on a per user level is I can then actually go in and then change what remaining navigation bar items certain users see. So in this instance, I might identify that Zach here does not need access to reports or forecasts because it's not an area that he's using. So again, I can come into the advanced section, and for our layout options here with the default navbar, I can then come through and identify those ones and remove those for him as well too. So that doesn't remove them for me, but it does clear them out for Zach, so that his navbar is then further simplified again. So this we find is a really quick and easy and powerful way to configure how the user interface is presented to people, and makes it a lot easier to take a look at. So if we just jump back to our just our agenda here. So the next one we're looking at here is then layout configuration. So we've obviously modified the navigation bar, but there's also some things we can do around the layouts that will also help the user to work with the system. So when I say layout configuration as well too, I'm not just talking about the fields that appear on a contact record. There's a variety of areas that we can make some simple changes that will make a big impact. And those are going to include the list view area, apart from the detail view, but also the settings for the additional available options for list views, and an area that we find often gets missed, which is the search function on list views as well too. So we're just going to take a quick look at those in the system here. Let's just jump that back to there. So I'm just going to jump now back into the admin panel, and this time I'm going to move down to Studio. So key and important thing here, and we will just touch on it briefly, one of the biggest changes you can make is the detail view layout for a module. So for example, I'm going to come to the contacts module here, and I'm going to go to layouts and take a look at my record view. Now this is the view that the users will see when they first log in. And by default, there are some functions in here that you may very well never use. So we find it's always important as well too to remove elements out of this area that you're not going to be making much use out of. So for example, for me, I can see that I've got sort of my key pieces of information that I need to know about this user up the top, but there's a few modules and fields down here that I don't use. So key to these ones might be this Twitter account and DMB principal ID fields. I can just click and drag that entire row just to the bin, and it will bring it back to the available side and just clear it out of my view. And I can do the same thing for any of the other modules in here that I don't need, that I can remove. So I can save and deploy those changes very quickly. And what's happening at the moment though is that when I'm looking at that contact view as a record, if we just bring this one up, just go on to one of these records here, is it displays it as two panels here. So business card and show more. You can see that we've also got fields for hint as well too. It's an additional feature that's added in for some SugarCRM users. So you can see I presented with quite a lot of information that I actually need to then scroll down to access. What we do find some people prefer to do is to actually have the key sort of pieces of information grouped together and then available as tabs at the top. So making that change is very easy as well too, because we can do that again just in layouts record view. And if I want to display things as tabs, I can change it from the top panel here. So I can go just change that to tab, save that change. So when I go back to our contact record and I just refresh our view, just take a moment. So now we've got a much shorter record for the user shown, and I can immediately see the key information I need to see and also my related modules. But I can then go to the Show More tab, and that will show me the additional areas of content in their own separate area. So that way, when the user is just working with key information, it keeps everything very compact and upfront, so it's easy to find, and then also very quickly to then see the relevant records I can see. Now, looking at this interface as well too, just while we're here, we can see that we've got a fair few modules here with different content in them, and some of them might be a little bit further down. This is a user-specific setting, so each user can make these changes on their own. You can't change this for them. But what is handy for them to know is that if there's certain modules and subpanels that they work with more frequently, they can move those into higher priority by clicking and dragging them into the correct area. So for example, I find that my user might be working more heavily with cases, so I can just click and drag that one right up to the top here. So that changes the layout for me. It doesn't affect any of the other users, but it just means that I can have the most important records front and center at the top of the layout, and less important ones further down, so I can see what I need to see. So aside from changing layouts by just adding and removing the fields as we need them, another important area to then take a look at is the list view, because we can change what is displayed on these list views, of course. So I can see these ones are here already, as identified here by the different names. But what we might find is that there might be certain fields that not every user needs to see. So that we may be looking at these, and maybe on that list view, the users don't really need to know, maybe the date modified or date created. And if we want to, we can just remove those altogether. But what we tend to find is better is to move anything that's not strictly necessary, but that might still be useful for certain users, into the available column. And then to also do the same thing with any of your new fields that you've added into the system as well too. And the reason for this is it doesn't immediately update the layout for all users, as in it won't put them in there for all users. So this will set the default for everyone. So when I go back here and I allocate these ones, we'll notice that our date created and date modified columns have now been removed. And we've got a more simplified layout, but there might be certain users that do need to see certain other pieces of information. So we just want to drag any relevant columns into that available section, and then on a per user basis again, so the user makes these changes themselves, they can click the columns option, and then they can just tag the ones that they need, and that will add them back in just for that user. So very quick and easy for the users to tailor the interface to suit the information that they need to see, and it can be specific to who's logged in as well too. The last area here, and this is the area I feel that most often gets overlooked, is the search function. So when you are on a list view here, you can use your filters up the top here and create them. And by default, you're presented with the fields that are available to be searched on. These are just default settings. So if you've added in new fields, or there's fields on the system that you're using that haven't been added in here, you need to be able to add them to the search function so that you can actually use them. So just coming across again, I'm still in my contacts module, still in my layouts, but this time I'm just coming down to search and selecting the search option. So this I find is the one that most often gets missed, but this is where you want to come through, and any new fields that you have added into the system, you'll want to drag across into search so that they're available to the users. This will go a long way to making the system immediately more usable for new users when they come on, because they can take under advisement the training that they'll get when they first get logged in, and they'll be able to utilize the functions that they need to use. So key among those is being able to find appropriate records. So again, I would just drag the ones that I need, and I can position them appropriately in the layout. So the other thing with this view as well too is that the way that we organize the search here is the way that they appear in the drop down on the layout. So I've now added my industry tags in there. I can refresh my view. And it's now there, and it's in the position that I added it into in that layout. This I find is very important and really good to update and grab to make sure that the users can access the functions that they need. And as we saw there, very quick and easy to do. The only thing to be aware of is that the setting is obviously specific to each module. So you'd want to make sure that you go through all the modules that you use in the system and just review that search function and make sure that the fields that you need are present in there. So just taking a look at our last module on our agenda this morning as well too, is we also want to take a look at mobile layout configuration. So we've talked a lot about the interface for the users as far as the desktop environment goes, but we do find that a lot of users do make use of the Sugar mobile app as well too. The mobile app is one of the really brilliant features of SugarCRM, and really useful for mobile salespeople and people that are just in a position where they maybe can't access these systems straight away, or need to access it mobile. What you will find though is that when we are going through these setups, everything that we've done here only affects the desktop environment. So if they were to log into the mobile environment, any of your layout changes or anything similar are not going to be there. Those environments are going to be default. So knowing that you have to set those up separately is also important. And there's just a couple of minor changes between these two that you'll find as well. So let's just take a quick look at the mobile layout configuration section, and you'll see what I mean. So I'm going to move back to our core administration page. And rather than accessing it from the studio, I'm actually looking for mobile layouts. So these ones are actually a little bit further up here in system. So the first one that we've got here is the module view. So I hit mobile here, and same as we saw in that other setting, I can control which modules are visible in the mobile layout. And again, when we're looking at these, we might go, okay, yes, yeah, we don't need revenue line items. We might want to keep notes because they're accessible, but maybe we don't utilize the employees module. So we can just tidy them up there and clear those out. The other important feature in this area is the offline setting. So by default, if you have this turned on or off, this will dictate whether Sugar will download all of the, I suppose, recently accessed records and keep them offline, so that if your user is out of signal reception range on their mobile, they can still open up the Sugar mobile app and access their recently accessed records, and even create new records on them, and then have that synchronized back into the system once they get signal again on their phones. So if you are needing that capability, especially if maybe you've got users that are going out to remote areas, and it could be something like mine sites or construction zones, areas where the signal reception may be poor, just turning that feature on is going to go a long way for them as well. The other area, so once we've configured the modules that are displayed, is we would then want to configure the layout of the system. So that one will actually come back into system settings. Into the studio, I should say. And we'll go back to our modules again, but you'll notice as I go to them, I've then got a separate area here called mobile layouts. So we've got layouts, which is for PC, and then we've got mobile layouts. And again, you know, we've got the list view and detail view. So edit view and detail view are a little bit different on mobile layout, so we'll talk about those here quickly as well. But they do represent largely the same one. But what you'll find here is that the edit view is what the user will see when they click on a record to edit it. And you might find that maybe you don't want them to edit certain fields on the layout, or maybe they maybe need to see more on there than they would otherwise. So you would add any of the fields that they need to make edits to in the system here. Where this does come in handy is you may make changes to this one if there are certain fields in your system that maybe aren't editable. So for example, fields that have Sugar logic applied to them, or are being triggered to be updated by workflows rather than users, you can remove them from the edit view here so that the user doesn't have to worry about changing them on mobile. The reason that this is important is because, unlike the desktop environment, mobile environment does not get immediately updated for things like Sugar logic and workflows, but it gets updated on save. So still reasonably quick for the user to get reaction to, but it still needs to be taken into consideration. The detail view is then exactly the same, but you might find that we display a few more options on there, as you can see with this one. The key item that you're going to notice that's different here is that the layouts for mobile view are single column. So you do just need to take that into mind when you're designing compared to the dual column nature of the desktop environment, and just making sure that you put the most appropriate and important pieces of information for the mobile layout up in the upper area of that layout. Other than that, it works exactly the same, where you just drag and drop your new rows and then drop your items onto those ones. And you can even just drag and drop the positioning of these ones as well too, to the correct areas that you need them. And then save and deploy those changes. And then lastly, we've got the list view, which is the same as our list views on the desktop environment. And again, we apply the same approach to these as we would to the others, which is to drag the appropriate columns that we want to be available into the available column. And then the users on a per user basis can modify their mobile layout and access the just the information that they need to see. And that largely just covers the additional areas of the configuration area that we wanted to talk about. So thank you very much for everyone that was able to participate this morning. I hope you've got something out of the content that we've been covering here today. This does bring an end to the series that we're running at the moment. But what we're looking for from here is ultimately some suggestions from people who are participating to give us some ideas of content that you would like to see us produce coming up that would sort of be important to you, or that you would like to know more about. So I'm happy for you either to submit that to our support at evolutionmarketing.com.au address, or you can even call through and speak to me directly. I'd definitely be happy to speak to you and find out what you would like to see us cover in the future, and we can then sort of make some notes about that and start to tailor maybe some more content for the future that's more specific to items that you would like to learn about, and see if it correlates with items that we have got identified in a backlog that we're looking to see how we would prioritize and address next. We are also looking to cover a bit more information around Sugar Market as well too. So I'll be discussing that with Darren, and we'll be organising that. But as we have an idea of the content that we want to present, we'll obviously alert everyone again with an email notification and invite you all to participate again further from there. Otherwise, look, thank you very much again for your time this morning. We'll finish that up here, and we'll be getting that last email out to you to give you all the links for these videos so that you can watch them later at your leisure or share them with anyone else. And yeah, please do share any feedback or any suggestions for content. We'd be very happy to hear them. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you later.